Nebraska is reaching the end of their spring practice, and it's time for them to make some tough cuts. So in today's video, I'm not going to predict who the Huskers cut. Instead, I'm going to make my bold claim on 5 Nebraska players who I believe should change positions going into their summer, going into fall camp. I've thought about this extensively, and I've come up with 5 guys who I think are better suited to change their position from offense to defense, defense to offense, and everywhere else in between. I'm going to go over who these 5 guys are, what they bring to the table, what their future looks like, and everything else you need to know. So really quick, this is a hot take video. I'm putting myself out there. Hit that like button if you're fired up, and really quick, if you support what I'm doing here. Daily Husker football content, so much more, recruiting updates, spring practice updates. Really helps me out. Please hit that subscribe button. Thank you so much. But without further ado, let's get into it, going over a lot of hot takes in this video. I have 5 players who I've thought about extensively that I believe should change positions for Nebraska going into this summer, going into fall camp. It's become very clear to me that they're better suited for a different position, maybe on defense, maybe on offense from where they already are. And I think this would be the best move for all 5 of their careers. So I want to get things started with a fan favorite. Not from the United States, actually from Germany. You probably already know who this is. Mr. David Hofken on the defensive line. Listed at 6'7". He's up to 300 pounds at this point in time. One of the most incredible specimens we've seen for Nebraska in some time. He just looks the part. He's jacked, man. He is huge. He looks like an absolute athlete. It looks like a bodybuilder basically on that D-line. But it's become clear in the back half of spring practice that he's just not cutting at D-line. He's not really on the too deep. Not really pushing anybody. And I go back to his recruiting process last summer when he joined Nebraska. A lot of college coaches weren't actually recruiting him to play defensive end. They were recruiting David Hofken to play offensive tackle. And I think that's where his future is. You know, there's a couple of reasons why I think he's better suited to play offensive tackle. First off, his build. Okay, he's 6'7". A lot of times these longer, rangier players, they're better suited for tackle just because of the way they're built, the center of gravity, the lower thick body right at the end, pause. So I just think that David Hofken, with how long his arms are, with how tall he is, right? He likes to use his hands a little bit more than he likes to use his hips. Okay, and that's a clear indicator to me that he's better at tackle than he is at DN. Just the fact that he really hasn't pushed anybody throughout spring practice, and going back to his college scouting report when a lot of these coaches wanted him. So I think David Hofken, I think his future really is at tackle. Now, he's one of those guys where he's an experiment. And I'm not saying if you move him to tackle, he's going to necessarily start for the Huskers. But I think it's just become clear throughout about a year of him already being on this team that maybe defensive line just isn't going to work for him. Let's move him over to offensive tackle, a position that a lot of people wanted him to play originally. And let's see how that goes. But I just think with his build, with how jacked he is, with how long his arms are, with him being 6'7", his thick lower body, with him, being really good with his hands rather than his hips, his IQ, his mental processing, his physicality, he would be better at offensive tackle. That is the first guy I think they should change. Going on to the second player, this is somebody who I go back and forth on. And this is Quinn Clark, fan favorite, legacy player coming out of Montana, second-year guy, 6'5", wide receiver, about 210 pounds at this point in time. I really like Quinn Clark's game. I think he's super athletic. I mean, he can go up and dunk the basketball at a high level. We've seen some windmill dunks from him in the past. So he can go up and get jump balls. I'd say he's kind of fast, but he's not quick by any means. He doesn't have quick feet. He's not a great route runner. I have trouble figuring out where Quinn Clark's role is at wide receiver. And that's why I would not be mad if they move Quinn Clark to tight end. And it's kind of like a Chris Hickman situation. If you guys remember Chris Hickman for Nebraska, we just didn't know where to put him. He wasn't fast enough to play tight end or to play wide receiver, but he wasn't necessarily big enough to play, tight end. So we kind of moved him back and forth all the time. I think you got to be very particular about Quinn Clark. You either got to move him now or you don't move him at all. Honestly, I like his future more at tight end. I think if you move him to tight end, he puts on 30 pounds of muscle or 30 more pounds, and it doesn't have to be this year. It can be going in next year, so he has a whole year to do it. I think he could be one of the best tight ends in the country with how athletic he is. Okay, he goes from being a slow wide receiver to being a very fast tight end if he makes the switch. And right now, Quinn Clark is not on the 2 deep for the Huskers at the wide receiver spot. He's not going to play this year. To me, I think tight end might be a better role. Maybe not necessarily at a traditional tight end spot, but as that, Heinrich Hoiberg role, Janiran Bonner role, just kind of as a utility knife. I think he could really thrive in that spot. So Quinn Clark, I'm interested to see what they do with him. They're probably going to keep him at wide receiver. But for me personally, wouldn't mind seeing what he could do at tight end. We will see. Going on to the third guy, this is Grant Brix, offensive tackle for the Big Red, going into his second year. I've been pretty outspoken about this. I believe that Grant Brix should be an offensive guard through and through. Again, he's 6'6", 310 pounds. Going back to Grant Brix' recruiting process, a lot of teams wanted him at offensive guard, and he really wants to play offensive tackle. So, for example, Notre Dame, who recruited him, Notre Dame wanted him to play offensive guard, and he dropped Notre Dame from the recruiting process because he wants to play offensive tackle at the next level. It's become clear to me with his build, obviously with him being from Iowa. I mean, you watch his high school film, he's not a great pass pro blocker because his team never passed. I think Grant Brix is better suited for guard at pretty much every single level, getting out of his stance. I think he could be a really, really good pull blocker at right guard, at left guard. They messed around with him at guard. They messed around with him at tackle. They're doing their due diligence. I think it's becoming very clear to the staff that he's going to be a better guard. And I think that duel with him and President Tamoa inside, go maybe next year. You have President Tamoa on one side. You have Grant Brix to the other side at guard. It could be a lethal duo. So I just think with Grant Brix, his struggles in pass pro, getting out of his stance, obviously not too much experience with that in high school. His build, his lower body, I think he could be a great pull blocker with how athletic he is. I really think his game is better suited for guard. I would switch him to guard, but we'll see what they do there. Again, they've cross-trained him. They try to do both. I think it's becoming clear to the staff he should be a guard full-time going forward. This is somebody who, again, a lot of people don't know about Kenneth Williams, but he has impressed a lot of people throughout spring practice at running back. Again, 175 pounds, 5'11". My opinion, actually, this is the opinion of everybody who's seen him play, fastest running back on this roster for the Big Red. It's become clear to me, though, that he's not going to play at running back, right? You can only put one running back on the field, maybe two in some personnel sets. I think that Kenneth Williams should be a defensive back for the Huskers. And will he actually play defensive back? Probably not. The reason why I say he should move to defensive back is because I think he should be primarily a kick returner for the Big Red, a Kevontae Turpin type. If you're familiar with Kevontae Turpin for the Cowboys. Kenneth Williams, coming out of Detroit originally, he played his last year of high school football in Lincoln. He played defensive back, so he's familiar with that position, but I think his game is better suited to potentially be a safety, potentially be a corner, to see what he can do there with his speed, with his explosiveness. I could see him be a really, really good corner, but more than anything, I think that just better suits him to be a long-term kick returner. He's a dynamic kick returner, man. He might be our starting kick returner next year. So Kenneth Williams, I just don't see a role for him at running back this year, next year. Just don't see him playing. I think if he wants to get on the field, on offense or defense, I think you could better put him at that secondary spot. But more than anything, I think it's going to better develop him as a kick returner, which he potentially is going to be our starter next year. So Kenneth Williams, I think he could go back to his old role, which he played in high school at DB. One last guy I want to talk about is Braylon Prude, going into, I believe, his third year for the Huskers. Actually, I think it's his second year. 6'4", 200 pounds, defensive back. Man, this is a super, super athletic guy. Did not have any offers coming out of high school. This was somebody that Evan Cooper saw a lot of potential in, thought he had got a dime in the rough here. He hasn't really played well so far at Nebraska. And I just think that's because he's playing the wrong position. He's not a DB. He's not a safety. He should be a linebacker for the Big Red. Now, again, he's so athletically gifted. He runs a 4.4. He's twitchy. He's fast. I think he can develop his physicality. He's not super physical right now. He's not really a great tackler right now. But he goes from being a really kind of mid, below average defensive back to being a middle linebacker who has NFL aspirations. Again, he has that height. He has the speed. I think he has the vision from watching his high school film. In my opinion, this is one of those guys where you have nothing to lose here. Okay, the guy who recruited him is no longer on the staff. It's either you move him to linebacker and he could be potentially one of the most dynamic linebackers in the country with his speed, or you just cut him. Why not put him at linebacker and see what he can do? Because he struggled at DB. He's not a DB. He really isn't. So this is somebody I think he should put at middle linebacker with his speed, with his explosiveness. I could really see it working out. And if that doesn't work out, you can just cut him. And I'm releasing this video after the transfer portal opens up. There's a very real possibility that Braylon Prude's already gone because he's not played well in spring ball. So that's the last guy who I've kind of thought about for a long time. Like, maybe you should move his position. I think he should be a linebacker. All right, guys, those are my 5 players who I think should change positions for Nebraska. Let me know your thoughts down below. Is there somebody I mentioned who you think should not change positions, or somebody I did not mention who you think should? Let me know in the comment section. Hey, if you made this fun of the video, hit that like button and subscribe. As always, folks, go be great. Go Met Rhule. See you in the next one.